Hello everybody, welcome to the IEP Live Learn Lunch. Really excited today. We are joined by I am here with David Imber from the Good Employability Company, and we're going to be looking at what are we here for, why bother, the choices and opportunity, employment and welfare, the ethics and consequences. Really looking forward to today's session. For those of you who've not been to a session with David before, David is one of our IEP fellows, and these sessions are always great fun and they're always great learning opportunities. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand you over to David, who is going to take you on our journey today. Thank you, David.
Helen, thank you very much, and thank you as always for being our splendid and excellent in every way host. It's great to be here. Thank you to all of you for being here during your working lunch time, which is a sacrifice which I really don't deserve, but I'm duly grateful for. If we get the next slide, Helen, what comes up? Here we go. That helps me to see this one, then I get my sense of what bookmark I'm looking at. When I started writing this, I wanted to do something terribly logical and rational and to present arguments that would make you all fall over with their clarity and perfection. But actually the world doesn't really work very well like that, and our world certainly isn't like that. And I thought, perhaps we prefer a moral discussion, because feelings matter and people matter. So rather than spending an hour scrabbling around about with lots of statistics and arguments of this, that and the other and political viewpoints, I thought we could ask ourselves some of the most difficult questions that we face, acknowledging as we ask them that the questions aren't entirely perfect. In fact, that's something we'll see, is that it's hard to frame the right questions, never mind the right answers. Now, yesterday, I was lucky enough to attend the presentation of the IEP Bounce collaboration on training and coaching. And one of the other people there asked a really important question about how do you cope with high caseloads? And just as is right and proper, the answer was by having sufficient skill to meet their needs and to manage your own stresses and strains and talents. And there's no argument with that, is there? That the skill of the advisor and it is the thing that we pay most attention to. But we don't ask many questions about the context in which we apply that skill. We tend, I think, tell me if I'm wrong, we tend to take the burden of our work and even sometimes the blame when there is blame to be given. We lack the kind of professional influence that, for example, a doctor or a doctor's professional body has on the NHS. In our world, ministers and departments have almost unfettered liberty to do what they want, and our professional standards are at best of marginal influence. So let's look at the first slide and just start at the top. Next one, here it comes. Right, this is simple stuff. We've got a welfare state. Anyone who thinks we shouldn't have is welcome to say so in the chat. And if you want to smile about the welfare state, please do that too. In the welfare state, some people are recognized as needing help, and mostly other people pay for it. So it's a really simple arrangement. It's been developing over about 200 years, and probably in the last 40, 50 years, it has become a really thriving part of our world. Next slide, please, Helen. Now, we can afford the welfare state because we're a rich country. World Atlas tells us that we're 24th in the world. Most of the others are probably bigger and generally more efficient, and it doesn't matter. We can afford it. And yet the common discourse in the press is, oh, we can't afford this, we can't afford that, taxes are too high. Now, I'm going to challenge the view that we have a welfare state because we are a rich country. I'm not going to challenge the view that other countries don't have a welfare state because they are poor. But we'll get to that later on. Let's look at the next one, Hannah. A brief summary of unemployment, as though you needed me to tell you this, but it's worth remembering because it leads us to our questions. Unemployment contributes to poverty, to illness, to great social differences, and some people even say, with good reason, I believe, that it leads to criminality and all sorts of other troubles. Just look at those two children playing on a railway line. Unemployment also contributes to an inefficient labour market. If there's delay in matching unemployed people to suitable jobs, that costs the economy. If people lose skills through lack of practice or don't get skills because they haven't had the training paid for by the state, that's inefficient. If people lose their ability to search for jobs, that's inefficient. So it's actually, unemployment isn't just a horror for the individual, it's also bad news for the state, and it leads to job matching services, public employment services, vocational training, welfare benefits to keep people looking for work. And you've hardly time to take a breath before welfare benefits leads to conditionality, sanctions, and taper rates. And that's where the problems start, don't they? Let's look at the next slide. Thank you for your point, Nigel. I hope everyone can see Nigel's comment in the chat. It's a very good one. So we've got a welfare state. We're a rich country. The welfare state is there for good reasons. How are we doing? Well, one of the things we do is we tax unemployed and low-paid people at an extraordinarily high level. This is from the OECD, measuring how much of your marginal income you would get if you moved your working hours from half-time to full-time and you were at 2/3 of the national average wage. So not rich, not wildly poor, not well off really. You would pay 75% of your increase in income in taxes and taper rate withdrawal of welfare payments. We are not alone as a country, but if you want to go to the Czech Republic, Spain or Greece, you're paying less than half that. So clearly there are alternatives. Next slide, please. When you get welfare benefits, you are also expected to look for work, and the policies that are applied to you are called activation policies. And here I have graphed from OECD sources the tax rate that you saw in the previous slide. That's along the bottom axis this time, and up the vertical axis, how strict are the activation requirements of each of these welfare states. You can see different countries have very different policies, and the United Kingdom is one of the most strict and among the highest tax-paying groups. So our welfare policies, it's fair to say, I believe, have plenty of stick and very little carrot. That's an interesting concept, isn't it? And it's one we're all familiar with, but when you see it graphed like this, you do realize there are alternatives, a wide range of alternatives. So our next slide, please. Those alternatives make one think, well, how much should a welfare payment be? I'm going to get your answers soon, I hope. But for the moment, let's think of the range. Is it none? If people are terribly poor, do they not have an incentive to do the first job that comes along and to keep it under dire circumstances if necessary? Or should we give people just enough to get by on? They don't need fun, they don't need big televisions, they probably can't afford a beer on a Friday, and many of them probably can't afford to turn the heating on. But come on, we've got to incentivize them. Or is it enough for a bit of social participation? You get the telly, you might get the occasional beer once a month. You know, you might be able to connect up with your family, but only on a pretty minimal level. Or should welfare payments be enough to keep you going as an active member of the labour market in terms of transport, clothing, networking, social contacts, your own social and professional respect?
Interesting question, David. They're being surprisingly quiet at the moment.
They are, aren't
I
they?
thought people would have popped in there by now what they thought that should be, but I guess it's quite a tricky one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do remember, everyone, we don't have to read your names out. So if you think your view's quite controversial, we won't read any names out at all with this.
Controversial views are very welcome, and the next slide contains your first opportunity to express some of them. Actually, it's an instruction, not an opportunity. So let's look at it, Helen. Right. We've got a question A and a question B, and I want you, please, all of you, to answer them by typing the letter and the number from 0 to 9, which best expresses your views on A, how much would you pay if you were in charge of unemployment benefit, and how high you would set the tax and taper rate. Don't hang about, because we've got a whole lot of these questions, loads and loads to come. So just jump in there, type your answer.
While we're waiting for people to have an opportunity to do that, Shannon has said, I think it partly depends on the reasons why someone isn't working. Assessing what a person can do isn't the same as assessing someone's whole physical and mental state, which I think is very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Nigel's got A7 and B2 and wins the prize for the quickest to understand my peculiar way of getting you engaged.
I like this. I think this is really good. I'm going to pinch this, David,
Simon,
in the future.
No, do.
An A4,
B4.
an A4 and an A4 to 5 and a B4. We've got an A8 and a B3. We've got no consensus yet, which is always good.
Yeah, it's coming, isn't it? Let's have a couple more here.
Let's see, we've got plenty more people. We've got an A6 and a B3, A8 and a B1.
Well done, Luigi. Yeah.
A7, B2. Lots coming in now.
We're getting a broad consensus that what we've got at the moment isn't quite right, haven't we?
I think we have, yes.
Yeah. A8 and B3.
A4, B3, A5, B2. A8, B3. It's interesting, isn't it? The Bs tend to be a lot lower than the As. You know, we feel that we've gone completely the wrong direction. A8, A6, B4. We've and Thomas has said, granted, I know nothing about economics. Me either, Thomas, as you would know if you were balancing my bank account at the end of each month. But hey ho.
But Thomas, you may not know anything about economics. I doubt your statement very much, but you certainly know something about morals, because we all do. And these are moral questions. Let's look at the next set of questions. Oh, the next slide, anyway. Right. The question you've just looked at express, or the A and B, both of them, express two opposing views about employability services and welfare. The most, I'm going to say common, that's not right, popular isn't right, but a frequent view is that benefits encourage idleness. It's too expensive to intervene in the labour market, and it's probably ineffective. People mostly go to work on their own, and so employment advice is a waste of money. Poverty is the great motivator. Benefits should be minimal and repaid. And that's the view that, if you think about it, you get if you say we have a welfare state because we are rich and we want to stay rich. At the other end of those two question scales, poverty is economically inefficient, it causes ill health, it damages employability. Fit people are more productive, and productivity increases the economy, which raises taxes, and the taxes can in part pay for employability and health. We are rich because we have a welfare state. Those two views are, I think, the fundamental considerations when we start to address the moral question of how do we do something for unemployed and poor people. There may be truth in both, and economists too, if you get two economists in a room, as it's been famously said, you're sure to get 4 or 5 opinions on these matters. Actually, the latter is a better model, says Nigel. Thank you. I'm inclined to agree. We're rich because we have a welfare state. Next slide, please, Hannah. So, what have we said? There aren't any easy answers, and social surveys don't provide decisive information. You can do the science, and it's good and it's helpful, but we, as we've already seen, we're reconciling opposites. These are moral choices, and the contracts we work under and the welfare support system which we work under embodies the moral choices imposed by the authorities. Because we have not got the power to change the policies and to change the welfare system. Would that we have, but we haven't. And somebody else has made that choice. So now, more questions, quick fire, because I don't want to keep you from your sandwich, your cup of tea, and certainly not from your afternoon's work. Good heavens, God forbid. Next slide, please. Right, we make moral choices. How do we make them? Answers, please, in the chat box. A0, A9, 5, 5, 5, 5 to 6, 5. We're getting 5s. It's coming. A 7. Yeah. 6, 7. Consensus coming up here. We're all in the middle. We've got to balance the work we've got to do with what our clients actually need. That looks to me, you might disagree with this, but it looks to me like a better balance than the carrot and stick graph that we saw earlier. Let's look at the next slide. I'm going to rush through these. Question B. Is unemployment and poverty necessary for the control of wages and labour supply, as some economists clearly state, or are they a drain on the economy and a cause of personal suffering? B9, B9, B6, 7, 7 and 8, B9. Okay, well, we're obviously not those right-wing economists that they love to breed in America. And C, Louisa, well done for getting on to C. Welfare payments, do they incentivize laziness? Do they tax the most productive? Or at the other end of the scale, are they essential to a productive economy? See, actually, this is a really good example of a question that's hard to frame, because incentivizing laziness is not exactly the opposite of essential to a productive economy. But forgive me, I'm not perfect. Are any of us? Are moral questions easy? They're not. B8, C1, Shazia, tax the most productive people. Any more on this one? Who's not put fingers on the keyboard yet? If you're just bored, that's forgivable. But if you're confused, just go for it. See how it makes you feel. C0 for some, but otherwise. So, Leanne, C0 for some, but otherwise 8. Yeah.
It is difficult, isn't it? And I think we had a comment earlier around, you know, it's so hard with all of these things because people are different, aren't they? And engagement levels are different. And
yeah.
And I think Poppy said it nicely. C is very difficult to answer as our views from both ends of the scale, but wouldn't go with number 5 as it doesn't explain all my different views. That is exactly what I would sort of say, Poppy. I agree with you very much there.
Yeah. And Shannon's comment, I think it might give more insight to have each point on the scale of its own from disagree to strongly agree. Well, Shannon, I strongly agree with your comment. This question is very confusing as it is posed, but you can see the sort of, if you like, the breadth of moral judgment in it. Yeah.
And I think this is the challenge that we face, isn't it, David? You know, that the fact that it's confusing and it's difficult is what practitioners face on a day-by-day basis when they're working with their caseload. So yeah.
And the people who set their caseload have answered this question in a different way.
Exactly.
Let's look at the next slide. So here we are, we've got a caseload of unemployed people. Should they take any job you can find for them? Should they do any suitable work? Should they be able to choose their work, or should they be free to choose whether to work or not?
Okay, so we've got some coming in, D5. And people are thinking about it. We have a D6 and an E7 for the next one, but D6, D5, 5, 5, 4, 5, 3, 4.
No, D3 is very much the sort of mainstream of English social policy, isn't it? That if you're getting welfare, you owe it to the country to go to work. But other people feel there should be a matter of personal choice and personal freedom.
So we've got some D5s, D3, D6. I know, David, and I know very much being brought up. When I was brought up, the sort of message I got from my parents was very much a sort of would be sitting D2, D3. Yeah. It's great to have a career and do something you enjoy, but in getting to where you want to be, you have to work and you do whatever work is available. Possibly because they didn't want to pay for me, I would say, at a push. And were worried I was going to stay at home, but I didn't. Okay, so we've got lots coming through.
Personal choice from Nigel. Personal choice is like distribution, longer term employment. So there's an interesting moral as well as economic point that you could put someone into a job quickly and they lose it, and you get all those costs and effort and pain and suffering all over again. So it again. The question as posed fails to answer most of the important aspects of what we do, and yet it's a question which is in the common thinking, it's in the popular mind, and it's one that ministers love to parade their ignorance about.
You know, Poppy's put another really interesting comment in there, David, around getting your foot in the door is the key to progression. You can't always start out doing exactly what you want in the long run. And interestingly enough, I was chatting to someone about something along these lines the other day around a friend who needed to change jobs, just went out, needed a job desperately, went into a warehouse to be a picker, knew they wouldn't want to do it long term, but needed the money, wasn't great at it, but the company loved that person's work ethic, found them a job within the organization that they could do, and now works all around the Middle East project managing and all sorts of things to them. So sometimes it can, but it's not a given, is it?
It's not a given. That's right. So let's go to the next slide. We've got loads of these, so I'm rushing on. Right, here's an interesting point. When should we help an unemployed person? How long should they be unemployed before we help them? And in this country, it's normal if you're young that you get help after about 6 months. It's normal if you're older, you get help after about a year. Here's a graph of the offloads into work from job seekers allowance by duration of claim. And if anyone can find a rational reason for choosing 6 months or a year, I raise my hat to you. There is no logically obvious duration of unemployment that sort of automatically says, oh, well, here's where we should kick in with our services. It's just not there. So next slide. This slide down the left-hand side, and I shan't go through everything on it because if you really want to follow up on it, first of all, an email to me is more than welcome. I mean, just love hearing from people, but you can freeze the slide on the YouTube, on the IEP's YouTube recording and study it in detail. But there are, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different ways of judging who needs help, and they all have different costs and are more or less easy to carry out and are more or less accurate. So they're very different. Benefit receipt, duration and disadvantage are the most commonly used. Age, location get used. Multiple factors, sort of triaging, education, location, age, various things is complex, expensive, works quite well if you look at the averages, but is really rotten when you try and apply it to single people. And then advisor judgment. You might say, oh, this person really needs loads of help. That's not used very much. There's always a risk of bias, but I think it deserves a bit more exploration than it's ever had. Let's go on. So here's a question. Think about that graph. 40% of people who are on the register leave the register for work every quarter. So if we didn't do it at all, what would the consequence be? Question F. Is it V0, V9, V4 or 5? You say.
We've got a V5.
Yeah. People say longer.
People are thinking about this one.
I can hear the brain sticking over.
Goodness, they really are thinking about this one. 7, 8, 7, 6, 7. Yeah. And we've got a W.
Yeah, we've found, well done for spotting the W, Thomas. Yeah.
I was waiting to see if someone was going to go with that, and 7. So
yeah. Nigel. I often think the most vulnerable are the worst served. I think you're right. Well, do you know what? Interestingly, I intuitively and morally, I agree with your 5, 6, 7, 8 responses, and also with W, but the statistical truth is 0, 1 or 2. Yeah, ain't that interesting? What does that tell us about what we're trying to achieve? Let's look at the next slide. Now, some clients don't cooperate and they don't work hard at going back to work. So what happens? Well, if they really get off the correct path, sanctions. Only, and then you might say, oh, well, okay, they need more motivation and it's going to take a long time. You might. I must admit, in my gentler moments, I'm of the view that as long as they understand the consequences, they can make their own mind up. Where would you be?
So we have 3s and 4s coming in so far.
Yeah.
So no one is a fan of sanctions being used.
Luigi goes,
Or we've had a why.
And Luigi, you've left yourself with the question, how much and when should sanctions be used? Yes, and Simon's another one. So you've posed yourself a question, and it ain't an easy one to answer.
We've got more 3s come in and 4s.
Okay. Keep that thought. I mean, only under pressure. Before we go on, any one of these questions, we could sit and have a really substantial debate for a whole day to try and answer them, couldn't we?
Yeah, we've had some comments come in from people who've said why. So Thomas says why, and I'd say that sanctions should only be put through as a last resort if they're being uncooperative to an unreasonable degree. Yeah. Shannon said, my father's doctor told me that if he wants to lie to them, that's his choice, and they'd have to respect that. This reminds me of that scenario. That's an interesting take,
isn't it? Yeah. And it's a fundamental of medical care that the patient is allowed to make choices. And yet in our world, they're not. Well, that's interesting in itself, isn't it?
So we've said Simon says he's reluctant to sanction, but will do if it helps the participant. Yeah. And Michael says sanctions don't serve any favours. So as ever, when we talk about sanctions, it's always very mixed, isn't it?
It's difficult, isn't it? Let's go on, Helen. So some aspects of the work we do, we believe it helps employers. It reduces the time people are out of work, reduces the suffering that's attached to the poverty, helps disadvantaged people, if we're good at it, to get nearer to equality, and it saves taxpayers money. And on the right-hand side, well, let's face it, we get salaries, we get good feelings, it's a lovely job to do. Well, I like it anyway. It's a bit erratic, good working environment, nice colleagues mostly, and it's rewarding. And question H, should we systematically not give help to people we think don't need it? Should we focus only on people who we think really are disadvantaged? Or 9, no, it's great for everybody, it always works, all in.
Okay, so we're getting 8s and 9s, maybe a 7. But so far, all of the answers we're getting are very much that it should be for everyone. Some more 7s or 6. 8. We're all to the right on this one so far. Nobody's gone below 5. Nobody's gone below 6. So I think there seems to be a feeling of supporting the disadvantaged because maybe they need our support, but actually widening that help, that specialist help out to the wider community. Widening
it. And just to be absolutely right, and I'm personally very torn on this question, because the graphs I've shown you of the off-flow into employment suggests that it should be a 1 or a 2. And so does the work which has been done on trying to find out who needs most help. Furthermore, I could say if all our efforts were focused on disadvantaged people, we might finally start to make a difference for them. But, would you really turn someone away? Difficult to say. This question is a reframing of the concept of dead weight, which means that we get paid for doing work with people who don't need our help. Let's look at the next slide while Luigi's comment is there.
So Luigi says, Scotland is trying to build employability career services accessible to everyone. The issue is the stigma attached to these services that are exclusively for underachievers and the disadvantaged. And there can be that perception, can't they, David?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The job centre has that stigma for a number of people. And indeed for a number of employers, which I think is one reason why the vacancies notified to job centres are heavily skewed in different sectors of industry.
That we're ahead of you this time. I've already got answers to your
Great.
next questions, David. Everyone's enjoying these.
Is your job goal to maximise your outputs or to contribute to equality in employability? Or somewhere in between, just to help people compete for the jobs that are out there?
So we've got on I, we've got all 6s and 7s so far. Yeah. So it's about helping people compete for jobs, but also moving towards that equality.
In J, if you can read it, but are you going to match the people most job ready to the vacancies, which is really another way of looking at the previous slide? You know, they don't need your help, but you can match them up and get an output. Or are you going to help the most disadvantaged people who are going to take a long time and a lot of support?
So interestingly, we started off with mostly J7s and 8s, but we've had a J4, and we've had some 6s and some 4s through now. So we've got a bit more of a split there around where we focus, how we manage our caseloads.
Yeah. And wouldn't it be interesting, everybody, if instead of saying my job goal and my goal, I'd said my employer's job goals and my employer's goals? Because if you're paid by outputs, it influences the way you structure the service. And there's Leanne Curry. Leanne, thank you. It can feel I naught and J naught, but that's not my personal goal. Yes, exactly. And yeah, this. Yes, Poppy, your employer's goal is J4. So furthest from the labour market, and my colleague is J8. So you're up on the, they really need us, so we'll focus on them.
And some interesting comments around the labour market at the moment, isn't it? It is. Someone said that, yeah, Michael said the job market is very competitive at the moment, and it's very important to work with employers that hire adults from disadvantaged backgrounds and may have other needs. And we're hearing a lot about how competitive the job market is at the moment, aren't we? We're getting lots of examples of how challenging it is for people at the moment. Simon says the goal is to help everyone, regardless of disadvantage, whether they're disadvantaged or advantaged, to move them forwards towards work. I think earlier someone popped that disadvantage, the word disadvantage, is a bit subjective. It can mean different things, can't it?
It most certainly does, in many different ways.
And just thinking about that competitive job market, that can change who is disadvantaged and who is advantaged just by the nature of the jobs out there and the people competing for them. It can change. Nigel says, ideally, we should be matching people to the occupation as close as we can.
I'm interested, Poppy, since you say that you have people allocated to all points on the scale, which your housing association is.
Shannon says, hasn't there been a shift for employers to be more flexible in terms of job sharing, shift patterns, etc.? That can make a world of difference to someone getting the job.
Quite right.
It's so flexible working is so important, isn't it, to so many of us, and I include myself in that.
Yeah,
I would really struggle to do my job if flexible working wasn't a possibility with my other sort of responsibilities. So it is key.
Likewise. Down here in Devon, I can do my work quite well. Don't have to go running around the country like a mad thing. Next slide, please, Helen. I'm in danger of waffling. Right, let's see now. We're all talking about things that are successful, that help people get into jobs. Look at question K. How can you tell what is successful? on the left, you know what's successful. You've got a feeling for it. It's an instinct. Or somewhere around the middle, well, if you've been doing it for 30 years, you just know, don't you? And on the right, actually, let's get some experimental data on this.
So we've got 7s and 8s, or 6, 7, 7, 8.
Yeah. Right, and look then. So if we're going to go with experimental data or something pretty like it, look at question L. Can we apply the science? And I'm ashamed to say I once answered naught by saying it's wrong to experiment with people's services. Or is our outputs a sufficient measure? Well, if you think about that graph of people going back to work from JSA, maybe not. Or should we be doing these comparative trials and scientific approaches? Look at all these lovely 7s and 8s coming up. Right. Here's a challenge. Anybody, please, who has participated in or read a scientific report of a comparative trial independently evaluated based on experimental data in the last 10 years in the United Kingdom, please type lots of exclamation marks in the chat box now. I've seen one, and it wasn't happy reading. So we agree, I think, that we need to see better data. We need to actually learn a bit more concretely and scientifically about what works. We'd like to see something approaching comparative trials and independent work, but none of us have seen any of it. Ouch. Ouch, ouch, ouch. That ain't good. That's no way to run a billion-dollar business. Let's look at the next slide. Okay, back to our moral questions. Is the labour market a fixed thing, which means that everyone who gets a job actually just means somebody else doesn't? Or do we actually think, on the other hand, even if you're competing for work, that's a boon to the labour market, that should count? And again, after all our thinking, N, who do we need to help? Everybody? Just the people who are eligible on our current contract? Or should we only help the people who lack labour market skills?
So we've had an M3 and an M9 in, an M1. I feel like I'm doing the travel news now. M1, M9.
Yeah.
M0 and N0.
Okay.
N8. So again,
so we've got some serious differences of opinion here, haven't we, just? And isn't that interesting? Because these questions, they're not brilliant questions, but they do embody our belief about who we're helping and the environment we help in some way. M3, M0.
Yeah, we've got an M5 and an N5, an M3 and an N0, M2, N7. Lots of this is the one that's really got the most differences,
isn't it?
Michael says everyone is entitled to help.
Well done, Michael. They are indeed. But it costs money to give help, and if you help someone who doesn't need it, that's effort that's gone where it isn't needed. Is the argument that's put forward and never resolved. So we've got a welfare state because we're a rich country. We're a rich country because we've got a welfare state. We disagree about the operation that we carry out in the labour market. and we disagree about who needs our help. Ooh, and we'd like a lot more science, please. Let's go to the next slide, Helen. Poppy, what Poppy is saying, I think competing for work counts as a success for getting yourself out there, gaining confidence and experience through interviews and feedback. All this helps towards the end goal. And
Absolutely.
Thomas says, here, here. And I say, here, here to that as well. But you might not get an output payment. So I think this is probably my last slide, really. So do feel free to chat in the chat box for a few more minutes. I did want to end early because you've all got your lunch break to think about.
But you've kept them too busy to eat while they've been doing it today, David. It's been fantastic. I've really enjoyed that.
Can people not, I just want to say a word or two about this one. Can people not eat and tap the keyboard at the same time? Goodness me. Lunch is...
but lunch, think and tap the keyboard at the same time. I'm not sure. We've had to work out scales and all sorts today. Really interested. I would just like to say, and again, this is individual differences, isn't it? Looking at that Rubik's Cube, you've put it's not complicated next to it. I agree with the second comment. It's not easy. Rubik's Cubes aren't, are they? Some people just look at them and can do them. Some people can't. So, yes. Let's see, we've got some comments. Thomas says, you dare ask me to multitask. I wouldn't dream of it, Thomas. I wouldn't dream of it. No, I don't want everyone having to eat lunch when I don't have time, I would say there. Lucy says, thank you. Poppy says, is there anywhere we can all network after? I would love to connect with you all, and I'm new to the platform. Poppy, we can certainly set up an opportunity to network for everyone. So we can really look at doing that. We do get lots of people joining in during the Live Learn Lunch, and it is a great community. And we are looking to set up, we used to have member sessions where members could just come along and talk about it, and maybe that's something we can look at doing again. Oh, they're going so fast, David, too fast for me, talking about how wonderful your presentation has been and much appreciation to you. And I always say to everyone, these sessions are always great when you come on. You always get us talking about things that are a little bit controversial, but we need to talk about in the sector.
Well, let's think about that Rubik's Cube. Actually, it isn't complicated.
Can I just share before you do, David, because this deserves a shout out. Thomas has recently solved a Rubik's Cube. Yay. Well done, Thomas. I've only ever done it by pulling one apart and putting it back together, which I think we would all agree is cheating.
I'm up for cheating.
Well done. So sorry, David, what you're about to say.
Well, the Rubik's Cube actually is not complicated. It's just a problem that is so unlike other problems that we meet that we find it very difficult. And I think in our employability work, it isn't easy to find the right answers. But we mustn't confuse that with it being complicated. It's not. Actually, there aren't very many questions that you need to answer. It's just that every time you answer one question, like the Rubik's Cube, it pushes on another one. And until we get, thanks to the IEP for existing and pushing this, until we get our professional standards and influences up a notch, we will still be bound by the politicians and the departments and the budgets in ways that make it difficult for us to answer the moral questions, and in some cases difficult for us to act in moral ways, even though we are not hostile to what we're being asked to do. I think it is about moral choices, and we all make them, and so do our leaders, and so do the people who contract us. So I don't know, what can I say? There's good evidence out there which underpins our moral choices, but it doesn't make our moral choices for us. It just tells us about stuff. And the moral choices and the good evidence are sometimes undermined, not by our work, I think, but by some of the forces that I've mentioned, and I'm not going to name names because they're not here to fight back. Though fight would be a good thing. It's another story, isn't it, Helen? We'll have it on another day.
I think so, definitely. Nigel said, every day I find that those I meet in my job have a different set of needs or goals, but are forced into a rigid policy of enforcement and assistance. One size doesn't fit all. So we can only do our best to give us support and guidance. I think that's very true. Yeah, very, very true. That's great. Now we are getting close to the end of the session, but I have good news, everyone. David's already committed to coming back and doing more sessions for us over the coming months. And we've not got the next date planned in yet, so I can't give you that, but I can promise you all that I will be speaking to him after today's session, so we can get that scheduled in our diaries, set in stone, and come back. But I think we can all sort of say it's been a wonderful session and we've really enjoyed it.
Well, my thanks to you all for answering questions and thinking on your feet or on your seat even at high speed. I really appreciate your taking the time. It's great. Absolutely.
Thomas has said, will this recording be on the YouTube channel? Yes, it will. I will make sure it goes up there. If you haven't already subscribed, I always say this, but subscribe, because then you get the notifications when the recordings are uploaded, when they're processed and uploaded. But yes, absolutely. This one will be up. And I think this has been a really great session. And I wonder, David, if we get you back to do this session at some point in the future, because I think there's lots of people who haven't been able to attend today that would like to do this session live and take part in it. And Poppy says, what is the YouTube channel called, please? It's called the Institute of Employability Professionals YouTube channel. And I will get a link sent out to everyone. Please do join us. And I know, Poppy, you said you were enjoying this session. We also have our Learning Network e-bulletin that goes out every week that has these sessions listed in it, so you can enroll. If you don't receive that and someone else gave you the link for today's session, do get in touch with myself. I'm just popping my email into the chat box for those who don't have my direct email address. You can send me an email and I'll get you added to that mailing list. As I've said, we've got David in future sessions. We've got lots of great sessions coming up in the future. Next week's a little bit different. Next week we've actually got Jane, one of our other fellows from White Rose Training, joining us, and we're going to be looking at the IEP accredited learning, and it's going to be a Q&A or an FQA session for anyone who's interested in finding out more about undertaking the level 3 accredited learning or the apprenticeship. And we're going to have some of the learners who have completed both, so you can ask them questions. You can also ask myself and some of the other deliverers questions about what it's like to undertake the learning. So it's going to be a great opportunity for those of you who are interested in maybe another step along your IEP career pathway. And yeah, we've got loads of great stuff coming up in the future, so keep your eyes out for those sessions. But David, it's been brilliant. I can't believe we've gone through an hour so quickly. It's been absolutely fantastic. Nigel says, another great session. Thank you. Thank you guys for coming. Yeah, lots of thank yous. And then the final thing, as I've said, one of the things that we are going to be launching over the coming weeks is more reflective practice sessions. They won't be taking part as part of the Live Learn Lunch. They will be separate. We are going to be having sessions for reflective practice for anyone who's undertaken any learning through the IEP, whether it's the IEP induction modules or some of the newer standalone modules. And you'll be invited, everyone will be invited to come along and have that space that Poppy was talking about, to share ideas and reflect on practice, what's going well, what might we do differently. And it would be great to see you all there. So yes, have a wonderful rest of your day. And people are still saying thank you, so it's lovely to see that. Enjoy the rest of your days. As ever, thank you all so much for spending your Wednesday lunch with us. And I agree with what Thomas has just put, that he hopes we all have a lovely week. I echo that sentiment to all of you. Thank you, everyone.